All opinions expressed on any program are those of the producer and or persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of DCTV. All producers and guests appearing on programs provide information and opinions based on information they consider to be reliable. DCTV does not affirm the completeness and accuracy. All DCTV members agree to adhere to DCTV's statement of compliance and are participants in a community medium forum where they're exercising their freedom of speech.
Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's show is live and is called Peaceful Transition. Thanks, as always, to Carmen Stanley, Project Director, Maurice Jackson, Studio Director, and Cruchet Starnes, Audio and Teleprompter. I began this series after many years of trying to deal with the mainstream media. Working in the World Bank's legal department, where I fought the deepest corruption in the world's financial system for 21 years, was another way of preparing to represent all of the world's people as the Overseer Mandate Trustee for the trust containing the world's monetary gold reserves and other wealth. Last week's segment was called Where We Left Off. As the lawyer for the beneficiaries of this legacy, I described my relationship with the banking cartel and with the other corrupt groups trying to steal the world's wealth that Jose Rizal placed in trust for all of humanity. I also began to describe how the different parties were interacting with each other. I made the point that nobody was denying who I was and what my job was. This is a strong statement when you realize that I publish for everyone to see whatever I send by snail mail and email directly to the various parties, including to the board of members. I'm going to describe a document that I've put at the end of the teleprompter today. I didn't even know whether we were going to have a teleprompter after both my PC and my laptop were hacked on Sunday. The good gremlins in my home office got me up and running again. I have to focus on the message when I rewrite things. The Cabal ends up helping me put the record out. So the documents that I've put at the end of the teleprompter are the monetary agreement for Pakistan. I tweeted this last week. All of the countries of the world need to negotiate monetary agreements. In 2014, I had forwarded drafts of the monetary agreements at the suggestion of Japan's former Senior Vice Minister of Finance, Yukihisa Fujita, and a member of Japan's House of Councillors. Today's progress report on the global currency reset, and you can see that in the tweet. The Cabal removed one of the replies in the DCTV archives about how the central bankers print worthless paper money and then get away with having they can purchase real things with paper currencies. And this is, I made sure to highlight what the Cabal censored. This is the secret trick of the bankers, and maybe we can stop scrolling on, I'll explain what this is. When you're a central bank and you have the right to issue currency, you can just buy anything you want with the currency. It's a big scam, actually, when you think about it. It's a big scam. And when you focus on this scam, this secret trick, it really becomes very apparent that the bankers think they're entitled to the world, and they're just totally parasitical. They're not, they have no claim on the world's assets because they're printing paper currencies. this is just a big scam. And when you focus on this, and also when I put this in the reply to the DCTV question, it was erased. And so I thought, well, let's highlight this. And so I have. And you have to really drill down and think about it. Think about how you have, you've got people that are just living off the fat of the land. You're doing the work, and they're robbing you. They're robbing you blind. Just think about it. Focus on it. And the point is, once you understand this scam, you realize that we're not going to put up with it. We're ending it, and we're ending it peacefully in a very systematic way, so that there is not going to be any huge disruption. But this system is ending, and that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about, the mechanism for how we end this. And of course, when people don't realize how they're being hoodwinked, it takes a lot longer. So you have to reach out. If you understand what I'm telling you, you have to reach out and get the other people involved, because this is not going to continue. We already know that we have a critical mass. That is to say, enough people realize that this is a scam that's not going to continue. Okay. The trick in printing fake money, it's called seignorage. I highlighted this in red. The Cabal thinks we're too stupid to catch them at their game. But the Cabal is the one that's stupid, actually. And you can see in the links. By the way, many of my tweets are being hidden. When you try to see them, you won't find them. You have to forward them to people, and that's the way, the word of mouth. The black nobility deleted a comment, and that's why I'm featuring it. It gives the answer to why paper money is corrupt. And, excuse me, could you dim the lights, because I'm not able to read the teleprompter now. So I'll just have to speak extemporaneously until we get these lights dimmed. And so I want to remind you where things were a year ago. That was when I had called up the World Bank, and I had asked them if they would please, the Secretariat is not in control. It's the Board of Governors that's in control. I can't read the teleprompter. You've got to dim it. It's much too bright. It's going the wrong way. It's getting brighter. It's still too bright. It's still too bright. It's too bright. I'm sorry for the interruption. Yeah, that's better now. Well, anyway, so let me explain about where things were in August. That was when people at the World Bank wouldn't answer my request for admission. And the World Bank was actually created because of this trust that contains the world's wealth. And we are to administer it. So the fact that the Secretariat is trying to steal the world's wealth, well, there's an impasse, and the world's military powers understand very well that they're going to keep peace until we get things sorted out. And one of the things on the critical path is that people have to understand what the reality is. Many people are confused about currency. When the central banks issue currency, they keep the difference between the face amount of the bill and what it costs them to print it. with digital money, it doesn't cost them anything at all. This ripoff is called seignorage. Get a grip on reality and figure out how you're being exploited. Okay, so let's go back to the mechanism in the World Bank, because it's not the secretariat that runs the place. It's not the president of the World Bank that runs the place. The articles of the World Bank are very clear. It's the Board of Governors, and I represent the United States on the Board of Governors, which is about 17% of the votes. And any country that disagrees with the minutes or anything else is welcome to go on record in writing, and so far they haven't. There hasn't been a peep. So we're now in the middle of the global currency reset, and we will be underway. Now you can see in the teleprompter that Pakistan had actually offered to start negotiating the monetary agreement. This was back in 2014. I don't know whether they're still prepared, but one of the things that I had also requested was for Japan and several other board members to go and look at the amounts on deposit in the banks that are held by the Global Debt Facility. And according to the laws of bailment, which is when you're a bank and you have accepted deposits from somebody else, you're required to give them back. But the bankers are, so far, they're ignoring all of us. So we're pretty much at a standoff, which is to say that it's pretty clear who owns the world's wealth. It's in the Global Debt Facility, and any attempt to steal it doesn't work. As I've explained, after 50 years, anybody that wants to prove that they own the assets, their proof is no longer acceptable because it's stale. So we have vested the assets. They belong to us. And we're just going to have to figure out peacefully how we're going to stop the central banks from buying up assets with paper money, which they're not entitled to those assets. Now, there's going to be a means to prove all of these things. We're not going to be using the regular courts because these are all corrupt. They're administrative agencies, and the judges are all working for the banking cartel. So you have got to use something called common law. And I've done that. And many of the representatives of the Cabal are now bankrupted. The way that works, it's really very simple. You swear what it is that they've done to harm you, and you let them explain if they haven't harmed you, and you send this, it's called an affidavit, you send it to them for 3 months, and at the end of those 3 months, if they haven't answered you, they're in default. And we have put many of the agents of the banking cartel in default, including Donald Trump, including Barack Obama. So they didn't want to explain themselves. This past week we had a little kerfuffle with Gerald Celente, who likes to tell people that he's a very reliable source of news. And I beg to differ with him, because if you've got the black nobility that have been exploiting everyone, they're the ones that are at the center of the banking cartel. And if Gerald Celente can't explain to us anything about the black nobility, then we don't find him a reliable news source. He's just part of the banking cartel. What you have now is that so many people have gotten so used to the bankers telling it the way they like the lies to be, that there's something called a normalcy bias, which is to say, if even if something is true, since so many people have gotten it wrong, they figure that that it's not true. Well, you're going to have to use critical thinking, and luckily there are enough people that realize that things are not the way they're the banking cartel tells them. So if you look at what happened with the Twin Towers, that's also something that we've been talking about recently. That story just didn't bear up at all. Building 7 was not hit by a plane, but it went down too. And I had mentioned on the 15th anniversary of the 9/11, 2001, how there was a lot of gold in the storage in the Twin Towers that went missing. So there's a lot more to that story. It was something called a false flag. So our governments are not reliable, and we shouldn't expect that they tell us the truth, because they absolutely do not. And the mainstream media is owned by the banking cartel, and so you're not going to get a straight story from them. And what we have to do is we have to figure out how to work together. And I don't have any magic recipes for this. It's a lot of hard work. I can tell you that when I'm responding to questions, and there are many people who are helping me, but and I've been doing this for such a long period of time that there are many answers that are pretty much already understood. But it's really pretty heavy sledding. The only thing to say about it is that I'm not going away. And the truth is not disappearing, and the inconsistencies are only becoming more and more apparent. So maybe we should talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty, which is going to have to be agreed in the monetary agreements. What we're doing is we're trading bad money, this paper money issued by the central bankers, for gold. It'll be spread very thin and in a plastic envelope, and the face of value of the bill is going to have the amount of gold in it. And gold is very consistent over time, the value of gold. So we're going to be exchanging the currencies. And there was a question, some people said, well, if you don't have any money, then how can you exchange anything? But that's really not such a problem. All you have to do is, there's going to be a limit to the amount of currency that somebody can exchange. I've arbitrarily said that that's $1 million per person. If we want to change the amounts, we can always revisit that. But in any event, if you're a person who's entitled to exchange $1 million of paper currency for gold, then you can borrow from somebody, and that person will be happy to exchange the paper currency for it's called aurum. So we're not going to run into a problem with people not being allowed to get their share of the aurum. It's going to be a much less exploitative world that we're in, and it's up to us to fashion the rules for how we're going to interact. But I expect that it's going to be wonderful. In the next segment, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that we do to celebrate the fact that we're in a different reality. And you can see some of the differences already, but let's face it, we're in transition. And it's not, I said we're in peaceful transition, but there's a lot of struggle. As I mentioned, the banking cartel hacked my computer so that I couldn't do the teleprompter. It was only at the very end that I was able to do something about it. But well, it's a wonderful world when you realize that people are not going to be exploiting each other, and that we are fundamentally at peace, and that we have inherited a lot of the world's wealth. And some people say, well, it's much more wealth than we expect there is. But actually, if you look at the radar, you can see where the gold deposits are, and yeah, they're there. They're really there. And we've known from the history of when the World Bank was created at the end of World War II. We've seen the paperwork. So yes, it would not be. It would be very unusual if this was not correct. And of course, the people in the Philippines are very well aware of this history in their country, and they're helping to educate many of us. There's no substitute for word of mouth, because as you can see, the internet, it's gamed. Google is created by the CIA, and it's meant to confuse you rather than to enlighten you. So when you talk to people, that's really a good way of figuring out what's going on. We're going to have to slow down and realize how to think, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. There's no substitute for logic, and it's actually fun to go back and to put the puzzle pieces together. In the years that we've been talking about the global currency reset, we've made a lot of revisions, but there are many things that remain the same. And one of the things that's remained the same is the fact that Ferdinand Marcos and Jose Rizal were the masterminds, and we're just implementing what it is that they've set out for us, and we're actually we're very indebted to them. But you can see from some of the correspondence that I've had with the people in the Philippines that they're right with us, and they're helping bring us along. One of the things that Gerald Celente attacked me about was, he said I was racist. Well, of course, you don't like being called racist, but I've mentioned some of the history of the Moors, and I've also mentioned the fact that there's only one race, actually, and that's the human race. So if I'm racist, I apologize in advance for that, but I'm not, I'm trying to do my best not to be racist, and recognize that that Gerald Celente calling me racist is not really advancing anything. But especially when we know that the black nobility exists and that they've been exploiting us for thousands and thousands of years. And Gerald Celente doesn't have a word to say about the black nobility. We begin to think that maybe he's not such a reliable news source after all. Well, I was going to tell you a little bit about what the board has written about what our next steps are. Although I'm not so sure that they are the next steps. We're going to have to get ourselves organized. But in any event, in June of 2014, I had written a memo, and I had asked them to start spending money to negotiate the agreements that we have to exchange currencies, because it's going to be a really rather large task, and we're going to have to be careful so that this opportunity doesn't get wasted, that we don't lose the gold that belongs to all of humanity. It's really a bookkeeping effort, and if people organize themselves well enough, there shouldn't be any problem. It's not rocket science, but we are going to have to come up with a good plan for how to implement. And with the military powers of the world keeping peace, I don't think that it's going to get out of hand. It's just a matter of sequencing and planning correctly. But anyway, so what I had written to the board about that, while I was describing Jose Rizal, whose name in the Vatican was Jose Antonio Diaz de la Paz and Severino Garcia Santa Romana. Well, there were a lot of names. Anyway, the Global Debt Facility has 1,715,000 metric tons of gold in 172 banks in 49 countries. Now, I don't think we're talking about physical gold. I think we're talking about the right to call the gold there. But there's going to be a lot of bookkeeping involved, obviously. And we're going to have to get on top of it so that the records don't get scrambled. Right now, they're in pretty good shape, although they're, well, some of them are not really, they're what the banking cartel wanted, not what Jose Rizal had intended. And what I wrote back in 2014 was that the Board of Governors approved and the New York missions agreed with the allocation of gold from the Global Debt Facility to each country. So this is all going to the countries. I want to thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've negotiated the point of no return in the global currency reset and are now discussing next steps. Some of the viewers have been hearing the truth now for a year and a half. Some of them figured it out on their own, and some of you may be hearing it now for the first time. You're bound to have more questions. Please stay tuned next week as I answer more of your questions.